Welcome back to the channel, A Hungry Sick Lakota Camp. A tight encirclement and one tactical decision that changed history. Comment below, do you call Wounded Knee a battle or a massacre, and why? December 29th, 1890. Wounded Knee Creek, South Dakota. The snow is hard and bright. Canvas cracks in the wind. A mini-Conjou Lakota camp led by Spotted Elk sits in the valley ringed by companies of the Seventh Cavalry with 4 mountain guns on the ridge above. The night has passed without incident. Dawn brings the order to disarm and to prepare for an escorted move to Pine Ridge Agency. The principal actors are set. Mini-Conjou Lakota, with kin among Hunkpapa Lakota, have come south seeking safety at Pine Ridge. Oglala Lakota leaders nearby try to steady the agency in a season of fear and hunger. United States officials have called for troops to contain what they call the Ghost Dance unrest. Department of the Missouri commanders direct converging columns. Interpreters, scouts, and agency police move between the lines. Winter illness weakens the camp. Anxiety tightens the perimeter. The question is precise and national in scale. What led a sick midwinter camp to stand under guns at Wounded Knee Creek, and why did this meeting decide how the country would remember the Lakota and itself? The answer lies in a year of policy and rumor, in ration cuts and allotment, in the spread of a prayer that outsiders misread as rebellion, and in tactical choices that put soldiers and artillery inside the orbit of families. This place on this morning would fix the words later used in reports in winter counts and in law. This story matters because it marks an end and a beginning. It closes the 19th century of Army campaigns against Lakota communities, and it opens a century of memory work, legal argument, and ceremony. To understand the reckoning that followed, we must first hold steady on the exact time, the exact valley, and the people who stood there. Winter 1889 to winter 1890 forms the prelude. In January 1889, delegates from Lakota communities travel to Nevada and Wyoming country, with reports of a Paiute prophecy that promises renewal if people dance and live peaceably. Through spring and summer circles appear on hills near agencies. By early autumn 1890, the ghost dance has spread across the Missouri River country. What many Lakota understand as prayer and consolation is read by distant officials and newspapers as a signal of war. Treaty history shapes every decision. The Fort Laramie agreements once set wide boundaries and annuity promises. After the Great Sioux Agreement of 1889, the reservation is carved smaller and allotment accelerates under the Dawes Act of 1887. Surveys divide land into individual plots. Surplus tracts open to non-native settlement. Rail and freight contracts extend to agency gates. Grazing leases and hay contracts bind outside interests to reservation resources. The old buffalo economy is long gone. The new cash and ration economy is fragile. Policy and administration tighten through these same months. Indian affairs rest under the Interior Department, while field control leans on Army columns when agents feel threatened. Agency rules expand work regimens and school placements. Children are pushed into English-only instruction and into off-reservation schools. Mission influence grows around agency towns. These measures are justified as civilizing policy. On the ground, they press on families already living lean. Rations change at the worst time. In 1890, the office cuts beef and flour below the levels communities expected from treaty promises. Agents blame congressional appropriations and the arithmetic of population counts. Families experience hunger and anger exactly as winter sets in. Measles and influenza pass through camps. Elders note more funerals. People dance more, not less. Songs mix grief, prayer, and the hope of a world put back in order. Immediate triggers arrive in a tight sequence. Through late autumn, agents at Pine Ridge and Standing Rock file alarm reports. Newspapers amplify rumors of an uprising. General Nelson Miles in the Department of the Missouri receives authority to prevent an outbreak. In November and December, converging columns of the 7th Cavalry and other units move toward Pine Ridge Agency, South Dakota, and Standing Rock Agency, North Dakota. Agency police serve warrants on perceived agitators. On December 15th at Standing Rock, an arrest attempt at the home of Sitting Bull turns violent. He is killed. Refugees move south toward Cheyenne River and Pine Ridge. Fear hardens. Each side carries clear objectives and hard constraints. For Oglala Lakota and Mini-Conjou Lakota near Pine Ridge, the aim is survival through the winter and protection under agency control. Leaders want to avoid a fight that they cannot win and to keep families together. Constraints are sickness, hunger, snow-packed trails, and the uncertainty of Army intent. Ammunition and fresh horses are limited. Many carry only a few serviceable rifles. Interpreters and kin who can speak agency English try to keep channels open. For the United States, the immediate objective is to calm the agency's disarmed camps that seem hostile and concentrate people where they can be fed and observed. Commanders must show control to Washington and to a national press that rewards quick action. Constraints are severe and practical. It is midwinter. Roads drift shut. Telegraph lines carry fragmentary reports. Columns live on hard bread, salt meat, and forage taken en route. Scouts and interpreters are few. Political pressure to produce results is high. Tactical doctrine favors encirclement and thorough searches that can escalate if done at close quarters. Logistics snapshots make the pressures visible. Army battalions ride out with wagons of ammunition, blankets, and rations, and with portable 1.65-inch Hotchkiss guns for overwatch. Troopers rotate pickets through long nights at 20 below. Horses need hay that must be hauled forward or cut from agency stacks. Relief trains struggle up from railheads when storms hit. At the agency's beef issue, days become tense public scenes. Flour arrives in reduced allotments. Families cut willows for fuel and move camps to sheltered draws. By late December, the policy map collapses into a single line of march. Interpreters advise patience and distance during any disarmament. Major Samuel Whitside's advanced detachment of the Seventh Cavalry meets the sick band of Spotted Elk near Porcupine Butte and escorts it toward Pine Ridge. Colonel James Forsyth brings up the rest of the regiment and the guns. The stated plan is to disarm in the morning and to move the people safely to the agency. The deeper causes and the winter conditions make that plan dangerously brittle. December 15, 1890, before dawn, Standing Rock Agency, North Dakota. Hunkpapa Lakota policemen ride to the log house where Sitting Bull sleeps, acting on a warrant issued by the agent and backed by Department of the Missouri orders to remove leaders judged dangerous in the ghost dance season. The air is brittle with cold. Frost smokes from the horses. Word of the approach runs along the riverbank faster than the men can dismount. Kin gather with rifles and clubs. In the crush of the doorway, a shot cracks, then another. Sitting Bull falls. The fight spills into the yard. Several policemen are killed. By full light, the headman is dead, and the homestead is ringed with bodies. Survivors scatter south toward the Grand River and Cheyenne River country, some on foot, some dragging sleds. At the agency telegraph office, the line clicks, breaks, and then carries an alarm that crosses posts and cities. Newspapers will call it the necessary removal of a fanatic or a blunder that turns prayer into war. For families on the ground, it is a rupture that cannot be mended that winter. Refugees bend their trails toward relatives among Minneconjou, Lakota, and Oglala, Lakota. South and east, late December, brings wind and rumor to Pine Ridge Agency, South Dakota. Oglala leaders try to quiet the circle and keep beef issue days from becoming rallies. The agent writes again that he cannot control the countryside and asks for troops. His message reaches General Nelson Miles in rapid form, but the countryside does not move at telegraph speed. Orders leave department headquarters in a clean chain. Couriers and scouts carry the words across snowy flats where drifts and fatigue tear the certainty from every instruction. Interpreters make meaning at each stop, smoothing plain English orders into Lakota sense that families can accept. The distance between printer ink in a city and a burned willow fire near an agency grows wider with each mile of cut wind. December 27, 1890, Cheyenne River to Porcupine Butte, South Dakota. Minneconjou, Lakota, led by Spotted Elk. Move slowly in winter. Order, elders and children in the center, men riding the flanks when horses can take the cold. Many cough and fever is on the leader himself. They carry few good rifles and little ammunition. Their stated aim, repeated to scouts and interpreters, is to reach Pine Ridge Agency and place themselves under protection, to accept rations through the hard months, and to avoid any fight that a winter camp cannot win. Each day the snow deepens, and the banks along creek beds grow a skin of ice that will not hold a rider. The trail is written in patches of blood from raw hooves and in a narrow trench cut by a single sledge. The same day's White River country and Badlands approaches. Companies of the Seventh Cavalry ride out from posts and railheads. Major Samuel Whitside leads an advance battalion with wagons and a pack train. Behind him, Colonel James Forsyth gathers the rest of the regiment with 4 1.65-inch Hotchkiss mountain guns and extra ammunition. The men carry carbines and revolvers and wear heavy coats that harden into boards at night. They eat hard bread, salt beef, and coffee, and sleep as their horses steam under stars. Guides point them toward the reports of Spotted Elk's camp. December 28th, late afternoon approaches to Porcupine Butte, South Dakota. The columns sight each other. Whitside draws up and sends forward interpreter John Shangro and scouts to parley. The scene is formal and careful. Spotted Elk rides in under a white cloth, shivering with fever, and accepts a blanket from an officer. He states that his people are going to Pine Ridge Agency to be fed and that they do not want trouble. Whitside has authority to escort and to disarm. Shangreau urges patience, warning that disarming inside a village will provoke panic and perhaps a fight that no one wants. The light fades fast. Wind comes off the flats with a bite. Whitside decides to postpone full disarmament until daylight and to escort the band to a more sheltered place near Wounded Knee Creek. Couriers ride to hasten Forsyth and the guns. Night of December 28th, Wounded Knee Creek, South Dakota. The escort halts on a broad flat near the creek and directs typies to be set up in a circle. Companies of troopers take positions around the village. Pickets stand with cloaks pulled to their ears. On the ridge above, artillerists unlimber the Hotchkiss guns and cover them against frost. In the village, women feed fires with willow and sage. Children curl against their mothers. Men sit in tight knots, silent or murmuring in low voices. Across the circle, soldiers search for warmth and watch shadows move against lodge skins. Each side reads the other at a distance that is too close for comfort and too far for trust. A blizzard halo builds around the moon. Signals and delays shape the night. A telegraph message to department headquarters reports the situation as controlled and anticipates a morning disarmament and escorted move to the agency. That message will not carry the feel of frost or the closeness of rifles. Within the perimeter, small signals pass between groups who do not speak the same first language. An interpreter's phrase can widen or narrow a gap. A hand motion can be taken as command or threat. A search for a particular man can unsettle a family already rattled by the death at Standing Rock. The gap between intent and effect grows minute by minute in the cold. Dawn, December 29th, Wounded Knee Creek, South Dakota. The disarmament detail forms. Soldiers move into the circle with wagons to collect weapons and with squads to search bundles. The plan, as stated, is to gather all arms, put them on the wagons, feed the people, and then escort them to Pine Ridge Agency. The practice is harder. Some men turn over old guns and worn ammunition. Others hold back a newer weapon bought dear in the past year. A man called Black Coyote refuses to surrender his Winchester, arguing that it is new and expensive, and that to give it up is to abandon dignity in a world that has cut his rations and taken his land. Soldiers press closer, voices rise, hands go to arms, not in a coordinated plan, but in a human reflex when corners seem to tighten. The circle that kept families safe in countless winters becomes a trap as the ranks of soldiers press inward. Elsewhere on that same morning, the agency town stirs. Wagons form to carry flour. The telegraph operator has fresh reports to send. Oglala leaders weigh whether to bring their people in closer to the agency or to move them away from a fire that could spread. At Drexel Mission, a few miles off, missionaries prepare for service in a wind that stings the eyes. The countryside holds its breath without knowing it is doing so. Primary source excerpt. Miles, telegram, Bar Pine Ridge, 1891-0103. I think the disarming of the Indians should not have been attempted within the camp. It ought to have been done at a distance from the women and children and away from the tents and without the aid of the battery. The message is written after the fact, yet it names the hinge that is visible in the morning light. The geometry of the encirclement and the decision to conduct a thorough search in the heart of a village narrow choices to a line as thin as a rifle sear. The escort that began at Porcupine Butte with blankets and caution has become a cramped inspection under guns on the ridge. Each minute adds strain, and there is no room in the circle for a single mistake. By mid-morning, the last delays wear away. Soldiers continue to pile rifles and seize knives and hatchets. Some Lakota men sit in silence with blankets pulled tight. Others watch the mule wagons. A few look to the ravine as a possible way out if panic comes. The interpreter repeats the promise of food and safe conduct. The wind stiffens and sends a sheet of powder snow across boot tops and moccasins. Children cry. A horse stamps and slips. Somewhere in that tension, a hand closes on a barrel and another hardens on a stock. The next sound will decide whether the escort moves in order to the agency or whether the valley fills with smoke. December 29, 1890, begins with formations on a frozen flat beside Wounded Knee Creek, South Dakota. The order of battle is simple and decisive. Several companies of the Seventh Cavalry stand on foot inside and around a circle of tipis. Other companies hold mounted posts on the flanks and rear. On the low rise to the north, a battery of 4 1.65-inch Hotchkiss mountain guns is unlimbered with overlapping fields of fire across the village and into the draws. Colonel James Forsyth commands the regiment on the ground. Major Samuel Whitside holds the original perimeter from the night before. Scouts and interpreters move between knots of soldiers and groups of Miniconju Lakota and Hunkpapa Lakota within the camp. The Lakota strength is the size of a winter band, roughly 350 people, with perhaps 120 adult men and well over 200 women and children. Many are ill. The creek bends and low banks channel any movement toward a shallow ravine to the south and toward open flats to the east. Snow crust snaps under boots, breath ghosts in the air. The march that put these lines on this ground ran from railheads and agency roads to Porcupine Butte and then down to this creek. Whitside's advance battalion had met Spotted Elk the day before, taken stock of sickness and fear, and escorted the camp here with a decision to wait for daylight to finish any disarmament. Forsyth came up in the night with the remainder of the regiment and the guns. The choke points are built into the land. The creek, the ridge, and the circle of lodges bend movement into narrow files. The Hotchkiss positions command the flats. Mounted men can close the eastern escape in minutes. Rules of engagement, as understood in the department's winter orders, allow officers to disarm suspected hostile bands, to search lodges, and to escort families to an agency where food can be issued and surveillance kept. No written order commands the destruction of a village. The arrest authority derives from agency complaints and from departmental cautions about leaders who might incite violence. The scope is wide in practice. An order to search and disarm within the circle places soldiers inside family space. It replaces the distance of a council ground with the crowding of an inspection line. First contact on the morning is procedural, not tactical. Wagons roll in to collect weapons. Squads break into smaller teams and begin seizing rifles, knives, and hatchets. Interpreters tell men to sit in lines. A pile of arms grows. Women keep children close and watch. The plan is to feed the camp, finish the search, and start for Pine Ridge Agency under escort by midday. The geometry, however, keeps tightening. A man called Black Coyote resists surrendering a new Winchester, as others do with prized pieces bought dear when rations fell and hunting ended. Hands reach, voices rise. The critical sound follows in a confusion of bodies at the pile of rifles. A shot discharges. What happens next moves faster than orders can travel. At close range, the nearest soldiers fire into the group of men. Several fall in the first seconds. Others reach for rifles from the pile or for concealed weapons and return fire from a few paces. The air loses its color in smoke and powder snow. The Hotchkiss crews seeing men running and flashes in the circle open with case and shell. The first impacts rip lodges and cut down people in the lanes between teepees. Horses rear and break reins. Children run toward the ravine. Women pull them by the shoulders. Men who can still move try to draw soldiers away from the families by firing from the flats and from the creek bank. Company officers shout to cease fire on the camp and to shift fire to armed men outside the circle. Some men hear, others cannot. The line has lost its shape. Shots from the rim and from inside cross each other. A number of troopers are hit by friendly fire in the first rush. The battery keeps firing in bursts to break groups seen as threats. Lodges burn and collapse, turning cover into trap. In less than half an hour, the fight becomes a running pursuit across snowfields. Cavalrymen ride down the draws. A handful of Lakota men use the creek bank and the cut of the ravine to fire and withdraw. By late morning, the major firing ends and the sounds settle into scattered shots and the dull blade of wind. Casualty ranges and contemporary records run wide, but agree on the heavy toll on non-combatants. Army returns and later compilations record about 90 adult Lakota men killed, and approximately 200 women and children killed, with variations by document. Some counts run lower, some higher, but all credible reckonings accept that the majority of the dead are women and children. Seventh Cavalry losses cluster around 25 killed and several dozen wounded, including Captain George Wallace. Sources note that a portion of Army casualties came from crossfire inside the circle as the first volleys rattled men and destroyed formation. The ground itself writes the conclusion. Bodies lie within the camp along the run to the ravine and across the low hills beyond. A blizzard will later force burial details to work with sleighs and ropes and to use a mass grave on a nearby rise. Non-combatants shape every decision once the first seconds pass. Soldiers and civilian helpers pull children from beneath frozen canvas. A few infants are found days later wrapped against their mothers. Surgeons set up makeshift stations, melting snow to wash wounds and cutting clothing stiff as wood. Army ambulances and agency wagons haul the wounded toward Pine Ridge through drifts that rise past the hubs. The humanitarian outcomes are mixed by necessity and by the shock of the morning. Some wounded reach care and recover. Others die on the trail or in crowded agency rooms. Men detailed to guard the site through the storm note wolves on the edges of the flats. Logistics stress shows in every report. The battery horses must be watered and fed in bitter cold. The men stand picket through the night in frozen boots. Ammunition expenditure for the guns is heavy for an action measured in minutes, as the crews fired repeatedly into suspected pockets while smoke and frost obscured the lines. Ration stockpiles at the agency were already short from cuts and now must serve an influx of wounded, widowed, and orphaned. Relief trains fight snow to reach the post. A day later, near Drexel Mission, skirmishing flares again as scattered groups and pursuing troops exchange fire. That contact reinforces the department's sense that control is not yet complete and prompts further sweeps, though the major collision has already passed. 2 short orders or after-action statements locate the command voice in this hour. Forsyth report to Superior Field near Pine Ridge, July 1890 to 12/31. The number of casualties were Captain Wallace, and 24 men killed and many others wounded. There were 82 Indian men and 64 women and children killed and buried on the ground. Miles' annual report note, Department of the Missouri 1891-09. The campaign was short but not without serious loss. The attempt to disarm within the camp was ill-judged in view of the presence of women and children. In the hours after the shooting stops, the department's legal and administrative machinery begins to move. Miles relieves Forsyth pending inquiry. Witness statements are gathered from officers, enlisted men, scouts, and interpreters. Surgeons compile lists. Agents submit their own narratives framing the ghost dance as a proximate cause. The court of inquiry will criticize tactical dispositions and ammunition handling, but will not impose criminal punishment. It will reinstate Forsyth and fix the official language near the Army's long-standing habit of calling the fight a battle. Lakota testimony, winter counts, and later histories will call it a massacre, with plain language and with drawings of shells bursting over lodges. The dispute over labels sits at the edge between fact and folklore. Some later retellings insist on a deliberate plan to annihilate the camp. The paper trail shows orders to disarm and escort, not a written plan to destroy. Yet the facts of position and method carry their own weight. To search a village at close quarters while artillery overwatched from a ridge made civilian deaths likely the moment a shot cracked and panic spread. The record is clear on that point. No plan of annihilation was required for the result. The geometry and the season did most of the work once fear and rifles met each other inside the circle. By evening, the winds rise. Details move among the bodies with canvas and rope. The guns are covered and the limbers checked. Pickets face a night that will freeze any wound left untended. At the agency, the telegraph wire hums with messages headed for department headquarters and Washington. Newspapers will print dispatches that call the day a victory over hostile Indians. Survivors will mark the winter count ring with a symbol of a broken circle and shells falling from a low sky. In the narrow sense, the campaign has met its immediate aim. Disarmament and concentration have been enforced at terrible cost. In the broader sense, the campaign has set a national argument in motion that will outlive every officer and every soldier who stood on that ridge. When the storm clears, burial crews work with shovels that clink on frozen ground. They drag sleds to the low-rise and cover a mass grave with snow and boards. The march back to Pine Ridge is slow punctured by the ache of stretcher handles and the thud of hooves in drifted lanes. The confrontation at Wounded Knee Creek is over in military terms. It has only begun in the memory of the Lakota and in the papers of the country that will spend a century deciding what words to use for what happened there. It is clear who, where, and when. Morning of December 29, 1890, at Wounded Knee Creek, South Dakota. A sick winter band of Miniconjo Lakota, with kin among Hunkpapa Lakota, stands inside a tight perimeter of the Seventh Cavalry. Spotted Elk is ill and wrapped in blankets. Colonel James Forsyth commands on the ground. Major Samuel Whitside holds companies from the night before. 4 Hotchkiss guns face the village from the ridge. The objective on paper is narrow and administrative. Disarm the men, feed the camp, and escort all to Pine Ridge Agency for the winter. The constraints cut across every decision. Ammunition and horses are abundant for the soldiers, but the cold is brutal. Rations at the agency are short and politically fraught. Orders flow by telegraph, but arrive at the creek as shouted phrases in a space crowded with fear. For the Lakota, the objective is survival. Avoid a fight. Keep families together. Reach the agency where food and shelter should be. Constraints are severe. Illness runs the lodges. Ammunition is scarce. The season is hostile. The camp is encircled. The turning point is the choice to conduct a thorough disarmament inside the circle with artillery and overwatch. It compresses distance and time until any spark becomes a fire. When a single shot goes off in the struggle over a prized Winchester, the geometry decides what follows faster than any officer can issue a corrective. Initiative snaps to chaos. Close-range volleys drop men at once. Return fire flares from the pile of confiscated rifles and from a few concealed pieces. The ridge guns speak. Non-combatants run for the ravine. The effort to control becomes an effort to survive, and then an effort to recover control after too late a moment. In that minute, the entire campaign pivots. The Army's plan to escort a disarmed camp gives way to a running fight and to casualty patterns that cannot be squared with an administrative action. Lakota men who can still move try to draw fire away from the lodges and toward the creek bank. Women pull children toward the cut of the ravine. Company officers shout to cease fire into the village. Some men hear and adjust, others do not. Smoke and drift erase lanes of sight. A portion of 7th Cavalry losses come from crossfire inside the circle as formation breaks. By the time the firing thins, the initiative has been lost for good. There is no route back to a calm escort. The day is now a disaster with families at its center. An evidence-based counterfactual is limited and concrete. If disarmament had been staged outside the lodges, at a measured distance from the guns, and if escort to the agency had preceded any intrusive search, the likelihood of panic and close-range volleys would have fallen sharply. If rations had not been cut in the autumn, and if newspapers had not rewarded alarm, the winter columns might never have converged on a sick camp at all. These are upstream choices, not breaths taken in the moment, yet they define the moment's shape. Admission against interest. Miles, Telegram, Pine Ridge, 1891-0103. I think the disarming of the Indians should not have been attempted within the camp. It ought to have been done at a distance from the women and children and away from the tents and without the aid of the battery. Set beside the ground as it lay, that line reads as a plain diagnosis. The constraint was not only winter or rumor, but proximity. To search at arm's length in a circle that contains families places fear at the center of the plan. The ridge guns meant as deterrent fix a second constraint. Once they fire, no later order can unmake the effects inside a camp. The human cost is carried in names where they can be held. Spotted Elk dies in the snow near the creek. Captain George Wallace dies in the first exchange. Infants are found days later wrapped against their mothers. The winter count ring for that year is drawn in many camps with a broken circle and lines of burst-over teepees. Ledger pages from survivors show families running toward a ravine as curved shells arc from a low hill. The displacement path from the site to Pine Ridge traces a slow line of sledges and wagons through drifts. Wounded are lifted in blankets stiff with ice. Those who can walk step beside wheels and hoof prints. The blizzard that follows forces burial into a single mass grave on a nearby rise. That grave becomes a landmark as much as the creek itself. The turning also fixes the language that will divide records and memory. In reports filed within days, the event is framed as a battle against hostiles whose resistance caused unavoidable deaths among women and children. In Lakota testimony and in later scholarship, the word is massacre, grounded in the placement of artillery over a village, the choice to disarm within the circle, and the numbers and identities of the dead. The Court of Inquiry will criticize dispositions and still reinstate Forsyth. That administrative outcome will not change the meaning of the winter count or the recollections of those who lived through the morning. Folded back into the structural forces described earlier, the hinge is unsurprising. Ration cuts at the start of winter tighten hunger and anger. Allotment and land pressure press families into agency dependence. The ghost dance. A prayer for renewal is read as rebellion in distant offices and headlines. Political incentives reward fast action more than patient counsel. Logistics teach officers to encircle and to search doctrines built on control that do not translate cleanly to villages with children and elders at their center. Each of those forces enters the circle at Wounded Knee Creek and narrows the range of safe choices. When a hand tightens on a rifle barrel, there is no margin left. This is why the turning point is not a heroic charge or a single-ordered volley, but a convergence. Whose is clear? Minikon Joe, Lakota, and Hunkpapa Lakota trying to reach safety. 7th Cavalry, under Forsyth, executing a winter pacification mission. Where and when are fixed. Wounded Knee Creek, South Dakota, on a bright, cold morning in late December. The objectives, constraints, and weather are simple to list and hard to live through. The immediate effect is the total loss of initiative and a shift from escort to catastrophe. The counterfactual is narrow and sober. Greater distance, different sequencing, and steadier rations would likely have prevented the morning from breaking as it did. The human cost is present in names and drawings and in a grave on a low rise. In that sense, the turning point is also a mirror. It shows how a year of policy and rumor can be condensed into minutes in a frozen valley, and how those minutes can define what a country chooses to say about itself for generations. January 1891 begins with paperwork and snow. General Nelson Miles relieves Colonel James Forsyth pending a formal inquiry, orders surgeons to compile lists of dead and wounded, and directs officers, scouts, and interpreters to give statements. In his annual report, Miles criticizes the tactical choice to attempt disarmament inside a village and records the short but costly winter campaign that followed. The Indian Office's 1891 annual report files parallel narratives from Pine Ridge with ration and annuity tables that now have widows and orphans columns in the margins. A court of inquiry convenes on Forsyth's conduct. It faults dispositions and ammunition, handling notes the presence of non-combatants under the gun line, and nonetheless restores Forsyth to command without criminal penalty. Later National Park Service studies reconstruct that docketed path, stitching the General Orders Officer report's agency memoranda and the inquiry findings into the baseline documentary record used by museums and interpreters today. Administrative lines tighten, even as weather deepens. The Department of the Missouri keeps converging columns in the field, through early January sweeps the draws and posts pickets to steady the agency. The Indian Office directs concentrations near Pine Ridge and Standing Rock so rations can be issued under closer supervision. In Washington, the Commissioner of Indian Affairs compiles the year's papers, including agents' letters on ration shortfalls, school placements, and allotment progress, situating the casualty lists within a policy frame of cuts and compliance. Resource use hardly pauses. Grazing and hay contracts continue through the agency offices because horses and cattle must still eat. Relief trains fight drifts to reach warehouses. Rail spurs that had brought flour and hardware into the reservation now carry inbound medical stores and outbound dispatches. The ledger arithmetic of allotment proceeds as surveyors and clerks divide landholdings into individual parcels and mark so-called surplus for outside entry, translating 19th century promises into maps that reduce communal range. Those clerical acts form the quiet sequel to the loud mourning at the creek. Health and demography show the cost in cold numbers. Doctors at Pine Ridge record winter measles and influenza exposure and wounds. Mortality spikes among women, elders, and infants are legible in agency returns and in the Commissioner's bound volumes for 1891. President Benjamin Harrison's December 1891 message to Congress addresses the ghost dance season, and Wounded Knee, in the language of order, restored a rhetorical contrast to the mortality tables and surgeon reports laid into the same year's administrative record. Cultural continuance persists under pressure. Ceremonies adapt to surveillance. Language endures in lodges and along cutbanks. Seasonal movements compress but do not vanish. Winter counts add a ring for 1890, with broken circles and shell bursts over lodges and ledger drawings sketch the run to the ravine. Decades later, the National Park Service's landmark files and South Dakota History's published reminiscences of enlisted men and Lakota witnesses would place those indigenous records alongside officer reports to anchor public interpretation. Memory becomes institution. In 1965, the United States designates the Wounded Knee battlefield a National Historic Landmark, a status entered on the National Register the next year when that program is inaugurated. The designation codifies federal recognition that the site holds more than tactical history. It is a place of mourning and testimony. Draft and final nomination files preserve the bibliographies that museums and teachers still draw from. On the centennial in 1990, both houses of Congress pass a concurrent resolution expressing deep regret to the descendants of the victims and survivors and acknowledging the historical significance of the massacre at Wounded Knee Creek. The resolution does not change land status or create a cause of action. It marks federal memory in cautious prose, and it becomes a citation point in later debates about honor commemoration and the limits of apology in law. The medals debate keeps the administrative story present. 19 Medals of Honor were awarded for actions connected to the 1890-1891 campaign. Over the past decade, tribal governments, veterans, and legislators have introduced Remove the Stain bills to rescind those awarded for Wounded Knee. In May 25, companion bills are filed again in the 119th Congress. The National Congress of American Indians and Descendants groups support the rescission as a matter of moral coherence between record and recognition. In September 25, the Defense Department, under Secretary Pete Hegseth, announces that the medals will be retained, citing a review that did not recommend rescission. National outlets report the decision. Native organizations issue statements condemning it as a refusal to align commemoration with the historical record. Wire Services newspapers and advocacy groups connect the decision back to the 90 congressional expression of regret and forward to contemporary debates about how the United States names its past. The policy choice keeps Wounded Knee at the center of national argument. Across these same years, life continues in Oglala Lakota and Miniconjou Lakota communities. Reservation boundaries persist. Allotments long tail shapes land use patterns into the present. Programs in language revitalization, tribal schools, and cultural stewardship operate alongside grazing leases and service area economics that still hinge on roads, railheads, and contracts first described in 19th century annual reports. Winter rides and memorial gatherings at the Cemetery Hill each December bind local time to national narratives and carry names that did not appear in officer returns. The story of Wounded Knee's aftermath is thus both administrative and intimate files and forms in Washington ceremonies and songs at a frozen rise above a creek. The administrative ledger closes the 1890-1891 campaign, but it does not conclude the question of reckoning. The inquiry that restored Forsyth the landmark that fixed the site in federal memory, the centennial resolution that expressed regret, and the recent decision to retain medals all sit on one chain of paper linking the ravine to the present. Those papers coexist with winter count rings, ledger art, and family remembrance. Together they show how law, policy, and culture move on different clocks and how continuance under pressure can shape a nation's archive as surely as a court's finding. In sum, the aftermath runs on three tracks. Law and administration process the event through inquiry returns and designations. Land and resources continue under allotment-era regimes that bind families to agency economies. Health and demography register the shock in the quiet notations of doctors and clerks. Cultural continuance remains the through-line ceremony, language, seasonal movements, and community memory that hold the names and the place. In that sense, the continuance is not only survival, but an argument in action that reaches from the frozen flats of 1890 to memorial rides and legal filings today. Across a century of study, a few conclusions stand with high confidence. First, Wounded Knee marked the terminal violence of 19th century Army campaigns against Lakota communities, not because orders called for annihilation, but because dispositions and method made non-combatant deaths likely once a shot was fired. Second, the mourning at the creek concentrated larger policy failures, ration cuts in winter allotment, and land pressure misreading of ceremony, as rebellion and encirclement as a default tactic into a single hour that the nation could no longer ignore. Third, Lakota continuance reframed the place over time. What official papers called a battle became, in scholarship and community memory, a massacre, and a site of ceremony, teaching, and return. Important points remain contested. Casualty numbers vary by document, with Army returns listing lower totals than Lakota testimony and later syntheses. All agree, however, on the heavy toll among women and children. Command responsibility is argued in the space between written orders and the geometry of the perimeter. Some readers emphasize the lack of a written intent to destroy others. The predictable consequences of searching a winter village at close quarters under artillery. Individual roles also draw debate. Colonel James Forsyth's decisions were criticized and then administratively forgiven. General Nelson Miles's relief and subsequent reinstatement of Forsyth are read either as a principled check on judgment or as institutional self-protection. The medals awarded for the campaign remain a live policy question, with efforts to rescind them framed by some as aligning honor with record and by others as anachronistic review. The enduring legacy operates on three planes. In doctrine, Wounded Knee stands as a caution about crowding civil operations with military force, and about the moral and tactical hazards of encirclement when families are at the center. In reform, the event has shaped how agencies and the Army speak about rules of engagement, civilian risk, and the responsibility of commanders to choose methods that fit human terrain, season, and fear. In symbol, Wounded Knee became a national shorthand for the gap between promise and practice in Indian policy and a focal point for later movements that asserted sovereignty, language, and land stewardship as forms of survivance rather than relics of a closed past. What carries forward is not a single verdict, but a set of obligations. The site holds the weight of loss and the fact of continuance. It anchors winter counts, ledger drawings, a landmark designation, congressional regret, and a continuing argument over commemoration. It is both archive and ceremony, both administrative paper and December rides. Wounded Knee endures in memory because it reveals with unsparing clarity how the country met a small camp in winter and how it chooses to speak about that meeting. Wounded Knee closed a century of campaigns but opened a century of memory and cultural continuance. It reminds us the distance between orders and civilian life can be a single motion of the hand. What might have changed if disarmament had been done at a safer distance? Leave a comment. Thank for watching.